This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Since you have not been on the Melt before, and maybe somebody listening might never have heard of you or what you do, what we know remote viewing plays a huge role in all of this. What first put remote viewing on your radar?
Well, back in the day, you're talking 1990s, I heard about the military group uh, coming out. They were leaving the military and they were coming out and talking about it and offering courses and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So I immediately followed that, pursued that. Then I invested that time period writing my first book, A Cosmic Voyage, which was a bestseller in its day, but people can get it for free at my personal website, CourtneyBrown.com, under
Mhm.
nonfiction, speculative nonfiction. And that was good. It was very naive, but it was fun.
Uh-huh.
It was a beginning of an exploration for this type of thing. I ended up not liking the procedures very well. I didn't think they were um, structured enough. I thought we could get more, do better with different procedures. So we ended up having a long period of experimentation, working with new procedures. And to be quite honest, we had, and I'm now being open about that. This is something I was not talking about previously. But the disclosure issue is so big now; it's become
Yes.
such a hot topic
Oh, yeah.
that it was going to be a situation where some of my opponents were going to talk about it and define me in a bad way. So we made the decision, sort of collectively, but also mostly myself, to just simply give the full story behind it. We were given direct extraterrestrial assistance in the early Farsight years up to the present time, and they helped us with our procedures. Our remote viewing procedures to help give them more structure to do better stuff. And we still work with them closely today.
Mhm.
So we had a period of time of about a year where one extraterrestrial, the ship would land near one of the employees and give physically interact with someone who would he would give information for that we were supposed to have the next day, and she would come into the office and just tell me exactly what was said, and I'd write it all down. And for a year, it lasted for exactly 1 year. And after 1 year, that stopped completely.
Hmm.
But that was a lot of detailed information that we definitely needed at that time period. We were being attacked heavily. So in addition to telling us what people were doing so we could protect ourselves, we got procedures. And so that was the beginning of that process. When we were trying to come up with our own procedures, they were always a bit anthropomorphic, too really oriented around normal stuff that you see in the news and stuff like that. They weren't sort of structured in sort of a non-leading generic way. So the ETs really helped us in that regard. We've had ongoing and continuous interaction with the ETs, with our side of the ETs. So it's a very highly problematic field right now because there's so much disinformation about it. But we
Yes.
have, that's where a lot of our procedures came from. And our procedures are so complicated that they have to be done with templates, pre-printed templates. We
Mhm.
use iPads with pre-printed templates where the viewers do their stuff. Our viewers go through a year of training full time. They're really the best anywhere. The band, that's not a joke. They're the best anywhere. They go through a year full time, and they use our procedures. And that's not knocking the early military procedures. It's just that we wanted to do things differently with a more highly structured set of procedures. And we have a lot of procedures that we haven't talked much about, but we're going to be starting to talk about that. We have procedures relevant to tech transfer, off-planet tech transfer,
Mhm.
technology transfer, as well as resource exploration, looking for things like minerals and gold and things like that companies would want to do. We have procedures for all that type of stuff, and they're all very different than anything that was done in the military. So, yeah, that's how we got that
When
off-planet
you
tech. You might call it
when
off-planet tech.
when you speak of we and our, maybe some of the people listening don't realize or know anything about the Farsight Institute. What is
Farsight,
that? Yeah.
yeah, Farsight Institute. We've had it's a nonprofit research and educational institute, but it's also a for-profit movie business. Two different companies,
Mhm.
and the for-profit is where our streaming service is located, dominated. That's farsightprime.com. We ran into a lot of censorship issues. We don't have any sexually explicit anything on our content. We don't have any extreme violence of any type on our content. And we don't have any political views, right wing or left wing, on our content. So we have been banned and shadow banned on Google and YouTube. Not banned entirely. You can still find us if you search for our explicit name, Farsight.
Mhm.
Actually, if you type for our explicit name, Farsight, in Google, you can find our apps, but you can't find us very easily.
Interesting.
Yeah, if I was saying,
Huh.
yeah, now this all changed. When the military was forced to give information about the UAP or UFO stuff to Congress for the first time, I think it was June 2021.
Yes.
That's when it changed. That month is when it changed. Before that, we
Interesting.
were top of the search of all search engines for remote viewing or Farsight or anything like that. We were always, in the top 5.
Mm.
And starting that month, the shadow banning started. So if you do a search for for remote viewing, just remote viewing in YouTube or Google, you won't find us at all. Yet we are the
Strange.
absolute. Yeah, you can do it right now if you want to, if you're on your computer, just to. But you that all started that month,
Uh-huh.
and it's and the issue is that we're doing things that the sort of authorities, powers to be, don't want you to see. And the proof of the matter is that you can, if you do a search for remote viewing, you will get a ton of stuff, thousands of websites, 100,000s of websites, but they're all junk. There's stuff that you're not going to get any sensitive information from, any good information. So
Mhm.
we knew that was happening a couple of years ago, we knew that was going to happen. So that's when we started up our streaming service. And it's an absolute top of the line streaming service, totally equivalent on a technical level, totally, to Hulu, Netflix, Paramount Plus, HBO Max, whatever. It's hosted by Vimeo, and
Mhm.
it's absolutely. And we have a ton of remote viewing content and projects on FarsightPrime.com. We have a large learning library for videos and so on, and that part of the content of Farsight Prime is free, and the learning stuff is free. Plus a lot of other projects. We have a lot of projects that are up on YouTube before the shadow banning and other things happen. We never had any projects taken down because we don't have any content that would warrant taking down. No extreme
Sure.
political views, no sexual graphics,
Mhm.
no violence. So they didn't have any reason to cause us to have our stuff taken down. We've never had a strike, a YouTube
Mhm.
strike for any of our
Lucky
stuff.
you. Mm.
Never. We never use copyrighted material. I mean, all that type of stuff. But we were banned and shadow banned, and that way you couldn't find us. So we were allowed to exist, but people were not allowed to find us. So that's when we started. Well, before that started is when we knew that was coming. So we started up our streaming service where we could do all of our stuff in a premier way with our own store, with our own place. And so farsightprime.com is where that is. We have over 75 major projects covering everything in the world that you can imagine. And if you go to our regular website, we have our own server, our own websites for just a regular, that's farsight.org. The menu on the left is organized in terms of our major projects, all grouped in nice sort of themes. So, for example, we have, I'll just go through some of the themes that we do.
Yeah, please do.
That in terms of we have, of course, themes related to, well, I'll talk about that in a while, but video recording UFOs.
Mhm.
But we have themes of leadership, President Xi Jinping, human leadership isn't compromised, Vladimir Putin, the 2024 election aftermath. Nicholas Tesla, Elon Musk, things like that. And then we have a whole series on the extraterrestrials themselves, the good and the bad.
Mhm.
ET wars that have happened between the ETs and our own solar system. And a lot of archaeology, Noah's Ark, Puma Punku, Göbekli Tepe, Eye of the Sahara, Nazca Line, Sodom and Gomorrah. And then religion stuff too, Muhammad, Lucifer, Moses, Ra, Zeus. And then things about the human condition, the nature of where we came from. And it's what we call the death traps, what happens after death. When you die, you see the light and you're attracted to the light.
Mhm.
That's part of a death trap. That's not a natural phenomenon. I can talk about that later if you want. And
Sure.
and projects dealing with how to escape, that type of a thing. And then regular ET encounters, Apollo moon missions, Phoenix Lights, Roswell, Area 51, things like that. So we have a ton of projects, and those are all done using remote viewers at work here at Farsight. Our remote viewers work. This is their full-time job. This is what they do.
Mhm.
And you can only do it at the quality that we do it as a full-time person. You can't do it
Sure.
like after. You can't drive a bus and then come home and do it for an hour.
Do it as a hobby.
They have to do it, and we train them ourselves, and they do it full time. And so that's our remote viewers, and those are the people that we work with. And we've had other people that have worked with us that were trained by someone else, but they moved on. And everyone that works here at Farsight is now people that are totally trained by us using technology that was essentially a hybrid technology that we developed in cooperation with extraterrestrial help to give us what we wanted to do. Working with the extraterrestrials has been very happy, pleasant for us. They're our side. They work on our side. If your audience is not familiar with the disclosure phenomenon that's happening big time in Washington, people like David Grush, whistleblowers coming out. There's an effort to suppress that, but that we believe is mostly show to make it look like it improves their credibility if the
Yes.
military looks like it's trying to. The reality is what you're being given is what the authorities are trying to direct, how the authorities are trying to direct the conversation with respect to the UFOs. The aliens, they know that the authorities know that this stuff is going to come out. And the strategy is when this stuff comes out, direct the conversation. If you try to stop it, it won't work. In fact, that was the original intent with the military, to release the issue of remote viewing in the first place. Let the military people go out and teach it.
Mhm.
And the idea was that they'd be confined within the New Age bookstore type community. And then it would lose credibility because it's sort of a flaky group.
Yes.
And the mainstream would stay away from it. I was a very unexpected element because I was a professor, am still a professor at a major university. I don't do this stuff at my university. I teach math and science courses, math and statistics courses in a social science program. But nonetheless, I am a tenured professor in a major university, and they were not expecting that. So
Mhm.
that rattled them. However, over time, they sort of got used to us, and the initial attempts was to try to crush us, but then we ended up getting some allies within the military. So the agencies, I'll just call them agencies. I won't identify which group, but the agencies normally crush all UFO, ET type interested groups,
Mhm.
or they manage groups that might develop serious interest. That's why you don't have
Yeah.
any. MUFON is not a. You may say, well, we have MUFON. The MUFON is very small and minor relative to what it could be.
Yeah.
So what the agencies did was typically disrupt every single group that was interested in extraterrestrial type of things. They normally do it. They have a variety of techniques, but the main way of doing it is to send somebody young and vigorous and enthusiastic in as a volunteer.
Mhm.
And then once the person becomes sort of a necessary person within that organization, the person starts causing conflict. And
Yes.
then people eventually start saying, "This isn't what I signed up for," and then people start leaving, and the group gets disordered. It gets just basically the groups just fall apart or
Mhm.
stay very small. So that's the normal way that it happened. That sort of that type of thing is controlled. But we, on the other hand, have been allowed to, after the first set of attacks, we have been allowed to do our own thing, and we have in fact have been protected, like seriously big time protected in ways I won't go into now. But things happened that were like, whoa. And so we're protected on two levels. I'm openly stating that we're protected on the level of somebody in the military.
Mhm.
I won't go into details about that, but um, we would be crushed if the entire U.S. military was against us. So
Sure.
part of it is for us, and part of it is against us. And
Mhm.
you should not think of the military as one monolithic thing.
Yeah.
It's a very complicated organization with people on both sides, and they fight battles behind the scenes.
Sure.
And then we're protected also with our extraterrestrial friends who have been with us since the beginning. And I mean since the very beginning, like when I was a kid, that type of thing. So
Mhm.
there's been nonstop contact, physical, regular contact. And again, we're talking about it now. We didn't talk about it before because I don't want it to be mentioned by our opponents for the first time and then people to sort of get that impression. But the
Yeah.
disclosure thing is sufficiently well developed now that people shouldn't have a doubt that it does happen, that extraterrestrials are real, the UFOs, UAPs are real. What you'll notice that in the stuff that's coming out of Washington, D.C., and you have major people talking about it. Chuck Schumer, head of the Senate, he's talking
Mhm.
about it in a big way. Marco Rubio, he's vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, a senator from Florida. He's very open about this whole thing. And, he's one that's trying to push for more disclosure and more types and get the hearings out. And he's the one who's talking about the whistleblowers and in a big way. But we have a lot of representatives also talking about it. But everybody's talking about the suppression of the information.
Mhm.
And so they think that's the big deal. But nobody's talking about what the extraterrestrials are doing. That's the problem. You see, that's what the military wants to prevent. That's what the guys who are on the opposite side of us want to prevent,
Mhm.
which is what they're doing. So once you get the idea, and there's some people, I'm never going to go into any names, so please don't ask me for names, but there's some very big people that you see talking on major podcasts about the ETs, and it's always about the government. The humans are bad. The government is holding things back. We're trying to push, and all the ETs are good. The problem is humanity.
Mhm.
That's total garbage. And the reason you're seeing those people on the major podcasts and on the major venues is precisely because that's what the authorities want you to see.
Exactly.
They're not opposed to that. They want you to hear that the humans are bad, that the ETs are all good, that type of stuff. The reality is, as above, so below. The ETs are just like us. We are ETs. We came from somewhere else, everybody, and here we are. But there's good ones and bad ones, and that's a major sort of separation faction. And we're aligned with the group that we call the good ones, and for good reason. And the ones that are dominantly influencing the planet right now, you can't say they're though. It's like this: the good guys who work with us have basically the hearts and mind of the people. I'll explain why that happened. The bad guys have all the leaders and the politicians, the leadership in their pocket.
Mhm.
The military leadership that they're so you have the leadership controlled by what we call the bad guys, and then you have the populace and the hearts and minds and the good guys. The good guys, the ones that we've been working with since the beginning, have essentially indirectly been manipulating the media, not the news media, but the movies, the Hollywood stuff coming out, by giving ideas to script writers when they're sleeping.
Mm.
Mm.
And now the good guys, our side, I would almost call them fanatical adherents to the principle of free will. They absolutely demand free will. I mean, you really would like them just to say, the heck with free will, just come and invade this place, kick the bad guys out. But they have reasons for not doing that. They're absolutely adamant about free will. And if you want to be a slave, if you want to be captured, if you want to be victimized, hey, that's your choice. But what they've been doing is they've been inserting ideas into the minds of scriptwriters, mostly while they're asleep. And then when the scriptwriters wake up in the morning, they say, oh, I got this great idea for a new show. Now, the free will ETs are totally in sync with free will. So they will not force the scriptwriter to accept the idea.
Mhm.
They just introduce the idea, and then they let the scriptwriter decide for herself or himself whether they're going to propose a movie. But that's where you get the whole Star Wars, the whole Star Trek, the whole Matrix movies, all this idea about reality being sort of controlled by it, like the Matrix kind, that there's a Matrix and you're sort of in the Matrix, but it's not really going, it's not real. The whole idea of there being a galactic civilization, Star Wars, that there's been a galactic war, all this type of stuff is being sort of seeded in. So now when the populace is eventually going to be told about this type of stuff, it's not new to them. Oh,
Yeah.
they've seen all the Star Wars movies. Oh, they watched all the Star Trek stuff. They
Yeah.
know about, travel across the galaxy. So that's where that's been happening. The bad guys don't want any of that to happen, but they can't stop that. In terms of a military presence, the bad guys are totally dominant on the planet. And I can prove that. And I mean, remember, I teach math and stats. So I use the word prove very seriously. I can prove that to you now, today, in the interview. Prove. I can prove it to you that the bad guys are, really holding things back and so on, and that and that they're dominant on the planet. The good guys are actually dominant in the solar system. They have a heavy military capability. They could defeat the bad guys, but they can't just invade. If they invaded and tried to kick out the bad guys, the whole populace would rise up and say, "My gosh, we're being invaded! Help!" And then our governments, which are in the pockets of the bad guys, would, rise up to defend, and the bad guys would give them some tech, and then the ETs would be trying to conquer the very people they're trying to save. And
Yes.
even if they did get rid of the bad guys, what are they supposed to do? Send everybody on the planet to re-education camps? I mean, we'd it'd be terrible. So it's a very challenging situation that the good guys are in. So the only way to get around that is to create a revolution from below, which is why they've been seeding the information into the Hollywood stuff to trigger the capability, to enable the capability of the masses to understand the situation and want to have uh, a different way of looking at it. And they want to understand what it's like to be under Palpatine in Star Wars and the Sith Lords versus the free sort of the free side. They want you to be able to know what that's all about.
Mhm.
But unless the public actually rises up and actually says, hey, look, we see what you've been doing. So all that has to come out in order for the public to know about it. And then once it does know about it, the people have to be sufficiently cognitively aware of those ideas, which has been done fundamentally by the good guys. So anyway, yeah.
So, did you have something?
Well, what I wanted to ask you, Courtney,
Sure.
is I have read Annie Jacobson's book, Area 51, and her book, Phenomena. And she talks about meeting Uri Geller and his relationship with the government. One thing that I found very interesting about her work is that she said, and one point in her book, that she was talking to agents that work, to government officials, and she was basically getting two different stories from the same agency. And she said what she realized was that some of these people are, for all intents and purposes, they're decent human beings.
Yeah.
They're just tasked to maybe discourage a certain level of investigation, or to sway the investigation to a certain um, direction. So she said what she realized was perhaps they were maybe giving her some disinformation as a way to quash her investigation that she was doing. Do you posit that there's any degree of that in the people that you are engaged with, or uh, whether they be ETs or whether they be actual government officials? Do you think that they do that to maybe manage perceptions or to keep control over the information?
That absolutely happens. That's exactly what happens. And it's very, very widespread. You find it in all types of organizations, mainstream media. If you have organizations that have sort of an extraterrestrial interest in the populace, you will find members within that organization that specifically attack and can sort of control the types of information that the members are sort of allowed to think about. For example, let me tell you the actual strategies that are done. When if you join an organization that has sort of an interest, that has members that have an interest in this type of thing, and the worry is that it might break out into a larger audience, especially anything mainstream. The techniques are the following. The first is they forcefully state fear, ridicule, and intimidation.
Mm.
You make the person say, this person is a laughing stock, and that person, if you follow it, that's going to make us a laughing stock for everyone. And it's so that fear and intimidation, ridicule, that type of stuff. The second thing is dismissal of all interesting ideas, theories, as technical glitches or crazy ideas. A favorite thing you often hear is, that picture was fuzzy. It could have been a glitch. You never know what it is. And then you have things like advanced tech. The ET tech is very advanced. They typically fly in the atmosphere over 20,000 miles an hour or 32,000 kilometers an hour, and they say there's no wake. I mean, there's nothing. They're not. They would burn up. This is crazy stuff. But they obviously have tech to deal with that kind of stuff. So they say things are just crazy. Anything dealing with time, they say is crazy. Anything dealing with alternate realities, different timelines. They say, oh, so you're saying it's done in a parallel universe. This is crazy. They ridicule absolutely anything. The idea of there being parallel timelines, multiple realities, it's called other worlds. And it's a thing that was actually developed by Hugh Herbert, a physicist who got his PhD under John Wheeler in Princeton in 1957. And he was widely ridiculed at the time by mainstream physicists. He got so upset he left physics and went into the Defense Department and became heavily involved in the nuclear weapons program and came up with, he was one of the primary engineers for the principle of MAD, which is mutually assured destruction, because there were people back in that day who were actually arguing both on the military and civilian leader side for a first strike against China and Russia, and he was and Soviet Union, and he was the one who was saying, no, you can't do that. So it'll kill us all. So he was the one who came up with the mutually assured destruction. So he saved us all. Anyway, but that idea of there being multiple realities is very common and normal in quantum mechanics. So the idea is that mainstream physicists mostly have this crazy thought that you have a line of decoherence, like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they have what happens in the quantum realm stays in the quantum realm. And what happens in the macro realm stays in the macro realm, and they apply different rules. And Hugh Everett said, that's crazy. That's monstrous. You can't do that. And so that's where that alternate realities came from. And then physicists say, look, how can there be alternate realities? We bump into each other. The planets would bump into each other. You can't have two versions of everything or multiple. So it was a whole new level of physics that sort of allows that to happen. And so when you talk about multiple realities, the debunkers are going to say, so you say something happened in a parallel universe. This is crazy stuff. They'll ridicule you. So that's it. And then they have direct verbal and written public attacks, meaning they'll write about you. They'll state things about you by name. And then they have meetings with select members of organizations, sort of pressing the flesh, encouraging or even coercing them into stopping publication of certain ideas or diminishing things, minimizing role. And finally, if all else fails, when you're making a presentation at a major group, they'll make noise, literally laugh at the top of their lungs in order to create a disturbance. So those are the 5 things they basically do: forcefully stated ridicule, fear, and intimidation. 2, dismissal of all interesting data and theories as technical glitches or crazy ideas. 3, direct verbal and written public attacks. 4, meetings with select members of organizations, press to flesh to get them to fall in line. And 5, if all else fails, when you're making a presentation, they'll make noise and cause a commotion. And people, if there's a commotion going on with someone laughing at the top of their lungs, people aren't listening to you. So they do that. They do that all the time. Now that's on the human physical level. However, it's different on the sort of New Age level, New Age community level. Let me explain that. The New Age community is a very sensitive group. If there was going to be anybody that would have new ideas come out that could eventually seep into the mainstream, it would be started within the New Age community. So one very key part of the repression process has been to control the New Age community. Because, just like if you have ideas coming out of Hollywood, people eventually become familiar with those ideas. If you have ideas coming out from the New Age community about certain groups of extraterrestrials being hostile and describing them in detail, eventually it would seep out and it would become sort of the folklore of everybody, and that would become sort of the main dialogue. So it's been essential for the bad guys to control that. So that is why the channeling community is so completely corrupted. What has happened is now the channels themselves, the human channels, essentially all of them, are some of the nicest, most honest, decent, wonderful people that exist on the planet Earth. But the information that they're getting is not from the good guys. It's from the bad guys.
Sure.
And the bad guys disguise themselves as being bubbly, happy, very positive, all types of good stuff. But the whole issue of the bad guys is to control the New Age community so that the reality of what the bad guys are doing is not coming out. So that's why our projects are so important at Farsight. And that's why we have them on our own streaming service. We have essentially rewritten the history of humanity. Now we know we're going to become very big at some point. Like everybody on the planet's going to know Farsight. So our first priority has been to get that library of stuff out so people can find out what has actually been happening for the last few thousand years.
Mm.
And so that's what our projects are really oriented around, to get that information out so that people can reinterpret and re-understand who was Ra, who was Zeus, for example. Zeus wasn't some crazy imagination of the ancient Greeks. He was a real guy. He was a prison warden, and he was also
Mm.
a serial rapist. That's all he was. Earth was being run as a prison. People were
Mm.
thrown in here. He was the guy in charge. He didn't fly around on a chariot. He flew around on a ship. And he had a serious sexual problem. He raped
Mm.
young girls. He did that for sport. He did it all the time. There was nothing good about Zeus. Same thing with Ra. And I'm talking, there's a lot of people that are heavily influenced by Ra, the Law of One. We're talking the same guy. The tune seems to change a little bit. They come back and try to reestablish who what their reputation is. So that they try to sort of reestablish, so they come out sounding like really good guys, but they're the same. They're the same people trying to reinvent themselves. So and the bad ETs. If you want to know what the bad ETs are like, when they were completely unchallenged, it was during the period of the ancient pyramid days, when the Egyptian pyramid days, when everybody was a slave and they were building the ancient pyramids with ET tech as well. That was what ideal. That was the prison that they wanted. That was them.
Mm.
That was disrupted when another group of ETs that were opposed to them came in and battled them. Now, it didn't actually get rid of them, but it drove them underground, so they couldn't act in such an overt way. But if they could act in an overt way, that's what they would do. And then they started going from behind the scenes. There's been a few other battles since then. But the good guys, the free will ETs, they really insist that people develop and make their own choices. But going back to the channeling community, look at it like this. The free will ETs totally demand free will, that you choose, and they don't want to go into the channeling community because it's so highly corrupted. So if you have a channel that opens herself or himself up to an entity, anyone that comes along, to use their mind, body, and voice to come up with ideas, who's going to do it? Now let's look at it this way. I'm not recommending this, but let's say you took your car and you put the keys in the car and the window open and you left it parked on the street in a city. What's going to happen? They're going to be honest people that'll come by and say, "Oh my gosh, look, they left the window open. The keys are in there. My gosh, what should we do? Should we call the police? I don't know what to do. I guess they know what they're doing and they just leave it." Who's gonna get into that car? You're gonna get somebody coming by and say, "Are you serious? This is great. The door is unlocked." They're gonna jump inside, take the keys. They're gonna run. The thief is gonna do it. The bad guys are gonna take the car.
Yep. The
Now,
opportunist.
if you're a channel and you're just opening yourself up and say, "Speak through my voice,"
Mm.
who's
Exactly.
going to do it? Do you think the free will ETs are going to do it? That totally goes against anything that they want. They don't want that type of thing. They don't want to mislead people. The bad ones are going to jump at the opportunity.
Mhm.
And so what they have done with the channeling community is put out this incredible ton of garbage about the ETs being good, that they're trying to fight for disclosure, they're trying to help people, and that that the problem is humanity. You need to get ready. You need to be ready for disclosure. You need to be ready for to entering the realm of the galactic citizen, to become a true galactic citizen, because your galactic brothers and sisters are all waiting with open arms, waiting for you to look up in the sky and accept your heritage. That's what the channeling community is pushing out. And that this is going to happen soon. Oh, the year 2025 is a big one. Well, then the year 2028 is a big one. 2027 is a big one. By the year 2030 is going to be big. And it just keeps, they push it out and they kick the can down the road further and further. You've been hearing these things since, like 2018. They said 2020 is going to be big. Actually, it goes way back. Remember the old days, 2012? 2012 was going to be big. They've been kicking the can down the road constantly, just keeping, every new year is a new thing that, it's getting closer and closer. And they'll have things about, different techniques you need to do to to get ready. And they have huge followings and stuff like that. The reality is that, and nowhere do you have the challenging, the ET, the channeling community talking about what the ETs are really doing. This entire planet is being run as a prison. And the prison is really now, what happened is, by the way, this is not really in dispute among people who know anything. Agreements were signed with the U.S. government and some other governments and the bad ETs back in the old days, like 1940s and 50s, to do experiments here and operate an underground basis. Now you can say, Courtney, how do you know this? Well, actually, this is something that has been public record that Chaim Ashed has said. Chaim Ashed is the former director, CEO, top of the line of the Israeli Space Directorate. That's their version of NASA. For 30 years. For 30 years, he was head of the Israeli Space Directorate. He's also a famous and former general in Israel, and now he's a college professor. He spoke on record about this. Now, he thought he was going to get away with it, so he did it in Hebrew, in a Hebrew language publication. However, it turned out that a lot of people know Hebrew, and it immediately got translated into English all over the place. He said that that the agreements were signed and that the extraterrestrials made an agreement to do experiments here. Now, what those experiments are is a cover story for a huge human trafficking operation. Huge. You're talking the biggest 3 income generators on the entire planet are human trafficking. After that, it's drugs, and after that, it's weapons sales. So that type of stuff is huge. The human trafficking is big among the ETs because that's why they're interested in the planet in the first place. You have approximately 8 billion people here. It's a huge resource. That is a huge source for a mercenary force, for prostitution, for child trafficking, everything you can possibly imagine. Everything that you see humans doing to themselves, the ETs do, and they have an entire population. There was also plans for a galactic-wide expansion, and they have a huge opportunity here to use these people. You also have human collaborators, many of which are in the U.S. military. Not all. There's a whole bunch of the U.S. military that's absolutely opposed to all of this. But you have human collaborators that are operating with them in exchange for certain tech and stuff like that. You have a very real. Okay, look at it this way. By the way, before the interview is done, ask me for the proof. Okay, ask me for the proof.
Will do.
So, but the human collaborators, look at it this way. It's now pretty much without dispute that there's been if you've been looking at the recent whistleblowers in Congress and listening to Marco Rubio and Chuck Schumer and all the whistleblowers, and that there is a UFO crash retrieval program within the United States government. And they have had intact ships and crashed ships, plus what they call non-human biologics, which is weird. Those are just people that are of a different species. Non-human biologics. Okay. So that they have had that for a very long time. If you are a general or an admiral, just put yourself in there. What are you going to do with an ET ship? Are you going to have all of your military personnel gather around it in a circle and sing Kumbaya all day? Seriously, what are you going to do with the ship? If you're a military general or admiral, there's only one thing you're going to say. You're going to say, I want it.
I want how it works.
I want that stuff. And they're going to be making deals. I want ships. I want to do that. So obviously there is a secret space program where we have, if we have these ships, put two and two together, the military wants those ships. So by
Mm-hmm.
this time, this is 2023, they have the ships by this time. And the
Yeah.
last thing they're going to do is use them on the planet for like other countries to see. They're not going to ship them out to the Ukrainians to use in the Ukrainian war. They're not going to fly them over U.S. Air Force bases and things like that. That's going to be highly kept secret, but they have ships, lots of them.
Mm-hmm.
And those ships can, those ships are very important to them. But with the technology, you have to allow the bad ETs to do what they want. Now, these experiments that they want is actually huge levels. It was originally thought in the agreements that it would involve small numbers of people, mostly people with serious infirmities, mental problems, things like that. That didn't turn out to be the case. You're talking hundreds of millions of people being involved in the so-called abduction problem.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
You're just talking huge quantities of people, and a lot of human trafficking. You know how many missing people there are? Do you think all those are just being uh, people that are walking off from bad marriages? I mean, you're talking huge levels. And well, that's what this is all about. And in the future, you having this population source of 6 billion human physical beings, that's a very big resource. In addition, at Farsight, we don't use the word soul or spirit. We use the word isbe, someone who is for the purpose of being. That's who you really are. This physical body is not you. It's just something you can kill. We have found that it's an absolutely impossible, certifiable fact. It is impossible to kill an ISBE. It is not possible for you to die. However, you can trap an ISBE. You can trick an ISBE. You can do all types of things with an ISBE, but you can't kill it. That's why Earth is now being operated as a prison. It's a place where a lot of people are thrown who are just really problematic. That's why we have so many psycho people in our streets. That's why you have so many mass murderers and crazy people. There's a lot of people that in other places they didn't want them anymore. They were just sick, and so they wanted to get rid of them. Now, in Earth, you dump them here, they can't get out. So it's a very convenient place to get rid of people you don't want. On the other hand,
Can you
go ahead.
explain that? Can you explain that? So, are you talking about a soul, a body being inhabited by an entity or an energy that's come from another solar system or another place, and then it is humanized and then set out into the streets?
Yes. When you are born, you are a being from another place. And those beings from another place, you lose your memory of who you were. That's
Mhm.
not normal. In other parts of the galaxy, you maintain your memory. In fact, in
Mm.
other parts of the galaxy, when you die, you get to keep your stuff. You keep your house, you keep your friends, you get to keep your kids, you get your money back. I mean, the whole thing. Here, it's like the vultures come in and take everything. You have to write a will to decide where everything, you got to give up everything. You
Mhm.
don't lose your memory. But in this place, it's specifically designed so that you lose your memory. That's one of our projects called the death traps. People die, they see the light. It's like a moth being attracted. And ISBE is attracted to aesthetic things. So when you see the light, you're drawn to the light. And the closer you get to it, it's like sticky stuff. The more you fight against it, the more you get trapped in it.
Mhm.
And then once you get into it, you get exposed to an extreme level of high voltage electricity, way more high voltage than a lightning bolt, way more. It can't kill you, but it can rattle you, and there goes your memories, and also there
Mhm.
goes your normal capability of remembering things. So you become sort of an empty shell, and then it's an all automated process, all done by AI. The new memories are put in. You're typically very often you're told that you've been working with the council, and the council of elders has decided you need a few more little wrinkles in your personality to work out. You haven't
Mhm.
quite solved the problems of what you're dealing with your kids, the personality problems, also with your parents and so on, your uncles. You need to work on this and your friendship. We think you need to go back, but you decide for yourself. And of course, then the person says, "Okay, sounds good to me," and they go back. and they get born again, they start all over, or if it was a near-death experience, they pop back into the body. So that's the whole thing, to keep things recycled. Now, the death traps aren't quite as efficient as they were back in the ancient pyramid days because of military battles, but they're still there. They're still operating. They're extremely difficult to locate, and they're extremely difficult to dismantle. But in addition to that, it's not just criminals that have been put here. It's all creative people, musicians, artists, philosophers, scientists. You see, if you've been in a civilization that's been around a million years and they've invented everything that can be invented, the last thing you want is a creative person sort of rattling things around. Just think of yourself, Socrates in ancient Greek days. What happened to him? Now, the only thing he did was meet people at the market and ask them probing questions to wake up their minds, to get the conversations going. They put him to death. They said, "Here's the hemlock tea. You drink it, or you're banished forever." So that's what these other civilizations are like. We don't need someone changing things. We got a cash cow going here, and everything is going great. And eventually, these creative people. Look at these artists, the hip hop artists, the physical, the painting artists, all the people, the creatives. Elon Musk always trying to come up with something new. Steve Jobs always trying to come up with new tech and stuff. They would never stop doing that, no matter how good you are, no matter how settled things in. They're ever going to lean back and say, "Oh, okay, now let's just rest." They're always going to try to disturb things and come up with new things. Eventually, that disturbs society, and they just want to get rid of these. So we have one of the highest concentrations of creative, interesting geniuses on the entire galaxy, right here on Earth, because of this stuff that's been going on for millions of years. But we also have a large population of perverts. So the kitchen sink has been thrown in here. So one of the goals is, once the disclosure problem happens for real and people will know everything, then the geniuses can be mobilized to help figure out the death traps and to both figure out how ways to discover them, to unravel them, to take them apart, dismantle them. So that's one of the things that will eventually happen. The bad ETs don't want that to happen. Even ones that are only like 2/3 or 3/4 functioning, they want everything to. It's a way of keeping the population. So yeah, why don't we go to the proof thing? In terms of, if you want to show that the ETs exist, that the UFOs are real and things like that, how do you prove that? Well, we have been developing our own stuff with our remote viewing procedures. Remote viewing is a mental process where you use highly trained people using highly structured methodologies to record perceptions that they're getting in their mind that are normally ignored by the by when you walk around during the day, you ignore these things. They're intuitive things, but they're okay. But they become really good at it after a long. It's like playing the violin.
Sure.
You sort of feel the music, but if you work on it long enough, you get good at it.
Yeah.
Okay, so but we always knew we'd have to solve the problem of demonstrating that the stuff that we've been talking about, especially with the extraterrestrials, is real. We'd have to prove that we'd have to overcome the problem of people saying that there's only a few ships out there. One was discovered over Bolivia. We had to examine that, photograph, and make a congressional committee or a military task force to look at that photo, to examine it, to see. We have to overcome that crazy stuff and demonstrate that the UFOs are real. So in December of last year, someone came to us. He was a flight traffic. Now you can come up with your own story about how it happened, but he was a flight traffic control person, one of the leading flight traffic control people on the planet. He's been a flight traffic controller in many of the major airports, including for many years, Washington, D.C.'s airport, the most highly protected airspace on the planet Earth. His name is Lincoln Lounsbury. And he came to us and gave us a presentation and said, we think you should be the ones to do this. He showed us how to take pictures of the UFOs, your videos of the UFOs, and he put it on our computers. He brought in the video. So we didn't discover this ourselves. He showed us what he thought was. Now we use Panasonic Lumix cameras, and it so turned out that the Panasonic Lumix GH6 had just come out last year. So he came at a time that the technology became available to us.
Mhm.
Before that, now the military grade cameras, they had cameras that could do this, but humans using prosumer and professional camera stuff that was available to us to buy on normal camera supply stuff was not available until last year. And that was the Panasonic Lumix GH6 cameras.
Mhm.
And the basic thing is to get video recordings of extraterrestrial spacecraft, you need to record at a fast frame rate and an infrared. So the Panasonic. So what basically happened was we had to raise some money. We got our Panasonic GH6s, and we had to send them out to be converted to what they call full spectrum cameras.
Hmm.
Excuse me. Full spectrum cameras. Any camera has a digital sensor in it.
Hmm.
That sensor has a piece of glass on top of it for all cameras. That glass is used not just for protection, but to stop any infrared and any ultraviolet radiation from hitting the sensor, because you don't want that when you're normally taking a picture. Infrared, you don't see. Ultraviolet, you don't see, and it would fog up the image. You don't want that kind of stuff to happen. Excuse me. So that's what that glass does. So you have to have that glass removed. Now you can do it yourself, but I don't advise it. You're going to wreck your camera. But we sent it out to a company called Life Pixel. There are a few other camera companies that do this, but they tend to put a neutral piece of glass on top of the sensor, and we didn't want that. We wanted the glass removed, and that's it. We wanted the sensor unprotected. We are really careful with our tech, so we're not worried about the protection. We're very tech protective. So when we have a full sensor camera, and then we use filters that go on top of the lens on the outside, because we no longer have a filter that screens out infrared or ultraviolet. We use
Mhm.
filters on the outside of the lens to allow us to dial into the infrared band that we want. So typically we've been using mostly we use the 830 nanometers band, which is what we call deep black. If you hold the filter up to the light, you can't see anything through it. It blocks all visible light, but the infrared can come through. So we put those filters on top, and then we shoot the sky. In addition, we shoot infrared. We shoot infrared at 120 frames per second. That's absolutely important, and it's also important to shoot in 4K or higher. 4K, when you're watching a television, or your computer screen, you're normally watching it in 1080p. That's 1080 horizontal lines for the entire screen, and there's 1920 vertical lines. 4K is 4 times bigger than that. So you have 3840 vertical lines, and you have basically 4,000 vertical lines and over 2,000 horizontal lines. So it's twice as big, but you're going to crunch that down into a 1080p picture. So the reason that's important is these ships are generally far away, and you can't zoom in with them in your camera using the zoom lens, because you can't see them in the first place. You don't know what you're shooting.
Yeah.
So you always have to shoot with a wide angle lens. And then afterwards, when you edit the material in post, when you're editing, we use Adobe Premiere, you have to zoom in post. You have to zoom in when it's on your screen to see. And so if you're shooting in 4K or higher, you can zoom in and you're not losing resolution, because you got all those extra pixels being crunched into that small spot. And so when you go into that small spot, you have lots of pixels so you can see it clearly. So you have to shoot in 4K, but you also have to shoot in 120 frames per second, because the things move so fast. So what happens is if you shoot it at, if you're in Europe or England, you're shooting at 25 frames a second, the PAL system. If you're in the United States, you're typically shooting, if you're in Hollywood, you're shooting 24 frames a second. If you're a normal consumer like YouTuber or whatever, you're shooting 30 frames a second. That's useless. All you're going to get is one dot. The things are going. We've actually had these things measured by our air traffic controller, technical expert, Glenn Ellsbury. He tells us the exact speeds of those things. That's what he does for a living. Those things are going 20,000 miles an hour or 32,000 kilometers an hour right over your head. You can't see them. Even if they're right in front of your face, you can't see anything that's going that fast.
Yeah.
So these ET ships are trying to cloak themselves. They're trying to hide their presence. They're over your head in enormous numbers, nonstop. And
Wow.
so what we did on our first venture out, it was January 10th of this year. We took our cameras, our newly configured full spectrum cameras with our proper lens with the filter on top. We just put it out on my deck and said, we shot for 10 minutes. We didn't see a thing. There was nothing there. We take it down. We looked up, blue sky. We take it down. We put it into the computer. We slowed it down because 120 frames a second, you slow it down so that you can see it. And then they were all over the place. In 10 minutes of footage, we found 50 UFOs right above my house.
Crazy.
And you can say, yeah. And so the thing is, you can say, well, what? How can they do this? And you say, well, see, the debunkers are going to come out no matter what picture you get. They're going to say, oh, it was a glitch. It was a technical glitch. It was a scratch. It was Photoshop. It was CGI. So by showing people the videos, that's not intended to convince them. So what we're doing is showing people how to take their own videos. So that's what we're become a specialist in. No sooner had we started to do this, now you're starting to get people make presentations at UFO conferences saying that they are so rare, the occurrence of these UFOs, that it's, it's very hard to actually get a video recording of it. Every time we do something, you have this disinformation coming into like UFO conferences and stuff like that, saying the opposite. So anyway, a lot of our projects involve video recordings that we have with our own cameras, and many of them like over my house, but also over Pensacola Naval Air Base. We just released a major project of video recordings over Pensacola Naval Air Base during a Blue Angels show. There were hundreds of UFOs. Now you couldn't see anything except the Blue Angels jets until you slowed it down, in infrared, and then you saw them, hundreds of them. They apparently like air shows. Now, I have done this before. I don't know if you're capable of doing this, but on we have these in our major projects. But we also like these days people use this.
Yes.
These days people like to, what's on the phone. So I have converted my personal Instagram account into an account that actually has examples of some of our stuff. So on our farsightprime.com, you get the full story, you get to see them, and then you get a remote viewing investigations all done on pristine video of those things, of what they are doing, like what are they doing over the Pensacola Naval Air Base. And we go into the minds of the ETs, but we also go into the minds of the commanders of the station, of the naval base, to find out if they're aware of what's happening right above their heads. That's a very interesting part of the story as well. But on my Instagram account, which is Courtney Brown Farsight, all one word, Courtney Brown, then Farsight, Farsight, no spaces. That Instagram account, I don't know if you're capable of doing that on your computers, but you could actually go to Instagram on your computer and actually show it like live.
I'll see what I can do. Yeah, I'll see what I can do.
We have actual footage where you could actually see some of these things. So, and again, I'm not saying believe my picture, because the debunkers are going to say it was Photoshop or CGI or glitch or whatever. What we're doing is we're telling you how to take those pictures, and there's nothing the debunkers can do about that. And the proof, remember I said the proof? Oh, go to Instagram on your computer and then go to Courtney Brown Farsight, Farsight. And then you'll see my profile. And then I can guide you through a whole bunch of them, and you can share your screen and show your audience right here, right now.